We're almost halfway through 2020, so let's talk about some of the phones that were unexpectedly good. Now, there were a lot of good phones that came out in 2020, and I'm not talking about the S20 Ultra or the OnePlus Pro 8 or the Oppo Find X2, because those were all expected good phones. But what were some of the good phones that came out that I wasn't necessarily expecting to be that great? So let's have a look at the top unexpected phones of the first half of 2020. That's a bit of a long sentence, but that's where we're at today. We're almost halfway through 2020. So let's pick some of my favorites that I wasn't expecting to like very much. Hey everyone, this is Abbas from TechRadar, and before we proceed, would much appreciate it if you could subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notified of all the new videos we post here on TechRadar Middle East. So what's interesting is that I have 4 phones that I want to share with you today. 2 of them were announced in February and 2 of them were announced in April. The 2 phones that were announced in February were both foldables, and I'm just going to go with the dates they were announced first. So the first phone that I'm going to be looking at is the first phone that was announced this year. There's no particular order of my preference, which one I like more or less. It's just when they were announced. So let's get started with the first one. So we'll start off with the Samsung Galaxy Z Flip. Now, this was announced alongside the Galaxy S20 range, and I wasn't really expecting much out of it. The biggest reason for that was that the Motorola Razr had been launched, and I wasn't particularly impressed by it. And the couple of things that I did like about the Razr, the fact that it had a large screen on the front, didn't exist on the Galaxy Z Flip. So I wasn't really sure if I'm going to like it or not, but you know what? I really like this phone. It's a phone that feels really good in your hands. It's small, it's not very heavy, and the fact that Samsung uses glass inside it does help a little bit. I mean, you can feel that it's not very plasticky like you do with other foldable phones. So that's a great thing about this phone. It's also quite fast, even though it's using last year's processor technology. It's quite zippy, it works well. I really like this phone. The couple of things that I would really like to see in a follow-up to the Galaxy Z Flip next year or this year, whenever they announce, is obviously a larger screen on the front. That would be nice. You've got a very tiny display, and my aging eyes don't help looking at that very often. I would also like for Samsung to be able to remove that front camera. Let me just pull up something which shows, so you've got a little camera notch on top. Would be nice if, you know, that goes away. Maybe if the screen outside is bigger, the primary cameras could act as selfie cameras, so that would you know, reduce the need for having a selfie camera up on top on there. It would also be nice if the bezels were slightly shrunk. I mean, I'm okay with them, they're fine. Screen with a higher refresh rate would be really nice. I think we've kind of gotten used to the 90 Hz and 120 Hz displays out on flagship phones, and that would be really nice to sort of get that on pretty much all phones that are released in the later half of this year or next year. So the Z Flip is the first phone that was announced in 2020 that I've really enjoyed and continue to enjoy using. It's a fantastic phone. I think Samsung hit a home run with this, and it's definitely one of my favorite unexpected phones of 2020. Moving on to the next phone, I've got the Huawei Mate XS with me, which was also announced in February, and I think this is how foldables should be moving forward. Foldables that expand into bigger devices. The Galaxy Z Flip becomes a smaller device, but to me, foldable devices should expand and offer you bigger screen size, and I think Huawei did a fantastic job with this. Now, there were a lot of concerns when Huawei released this phone that because the screen is pretty much out in the front, there's a good chance that it might get scratched or damaged easily. Hasn't happened to me. I've used this phone for over a month and a half as my daily driver, and you know, I didn't have any issues. It was placed in cup holders in the cars or just slid across, you know, on your table surfaces and stuff, and the phone is just perfect. I haven't seen anything wrong with it. No noticeable scratches or anything at all. It is a tad bit heavy, so if I was to change anything about it, I would probably make it slightly smaller version of it, thinner, lighter, not as tall. I think that would make it a lot more comfortable to hold in your hand. But as far as the form factor is concerned, I love that there's no notch or punch hole technology on the front. You're getting a full screen, and then, you know, obviously your main cameras can also be used as selfie cameras on the screen on the back. You know, it doesn't support wireless charging, maybe because you have a screen on the back right now. Maybe that could be the reason it doesn't allow that, so it would be nice to have that in the next model as well. But the Mate 20 XS is definitely how I envision foldables moving forward, and is the second phone that I unexpectedly really liked very much from 2020. So the third phone in this roundup is the iPhone SE 2020 edition. Now, iPhone SE 2020 was very much an expected device, but there were two big surprises with it. The first one was the chipset. Apple used A13, which is the fastest chipset they have. That's also found in the iPhone 11 Pro, their flagship phone. So that same chipset powers this little guy. And the second thing was the pricing on it, around 1600 dirhams or so, which is about $400 odd. I think Apple really positioned this phone perfectly. The A13 processor will allow it to get software updates for the next 3-4 years. I don't know. I mean, so Apple is very good at software updates, and equipping this with the latest processor allows them to sort of use it even further. And yes, I understand that this is an old design, but you know what? It still works. It's still quite nice. And as a secondary phone, I mean, especially if you want to use Android as your primary phone but want an iOS device as a secondary device, I think this works great. Obviously, if your primary device is iOS, then the iPhone 11 or the Pro are the better choices, but this is a great second phone at a great price. What could Apple change about this in the next version? Well, honestly speaking, nobody really knows that, because the iPhone SE isn't on a regular release schedule for every year. Apple just decides to release one whenever they feel like it. And going by the past, the previous iPhone SE had the older design, and so does this one. So I guess when the iPhone XS design gets older, whenever there's a newer version of that, we'll probably see that as the next update to the SE. Could be another 2 to 3 years from now, I don't know. But this is definitely one of the phones that took me by surprise, especially because of its pricing, and is the third phone that is unexpectedly one of my favorite phones of 2020. So the final phone that I have with me today that kind of surprised me is the Motorola Edge Plus. Now, you might wonder, what is it about the Motorola Edge Plus that surprised me? It's a flagship phone, and yes, it is. When Motorola announced this phone and I looked at all the specs, Snapdragon 865, 12 gigs of RAM, 108 megapixel camera, 5000 milliamp battery, there wasn't anything that wasn't done previously. The Samsung Galaxy S20 Ultra checks all of those boxes, right? So there wasn't anything in particular that stood out about this phone to me. But when I got to try it out, when I actually played with the phone, that changed. I think it starts with obviously the fact that the design of this phone is such that it's very comfortable to hold in one hand. It's about 200 grams, which is not very heavy, and then it's just about 70-71 millimeters in width, which makes it very, very comfortable in your hand. So that's the one thing that Motorola really got it right. Then obviously a completely stock Android experience, and OnePlus offers a pretty significant stock Android experience. With this one, the Messages app, the dialing app, the photos, the galleries, everything is very, very Android, very stock Google apps that aren't there on other phones. So those two things combined with just the overall speed of the phone, the quality of the camera, the long life of the battery, and pretty much all the features that you could expect out of a flagship phone made me like this phone a lot more than I thought it would. And this is the final phone that I was surprised by and delighted by for the first half of 2020. What I would like to see with Motorola going forward is obviously official IP68 rating. This phone doesn't support that. And then I still have those accidental touches on the sides of the phone. The screen is nice, yes, I mean, it looks beautiful when you have got an ultra curved display, just rolling over. But the problem is that if you do end up tapping accidentally, Motorola's got a good feature where some of the apps you can, decrease the curve of the screen, so it just stays more on the top. If that could be applied to the entire UI, I think that would help a lot with those accidental touches. So those were the 4 phones that have excited me and surprised me for the first half of 2020. I wasn't expecting to like either of those phones very much, but I did. I used them a lot more than I thought I would. I'm excited about what each of those manufacturers brings in the next version of these phones, and I'm excited to see what other phones come out in the rest of the 2020, rest of this year, to see if I can find any other phone that surprises me, excites me, delights me more than I thought it would. If you like this video, please do let me know if there's any particular phone that you liked in particular that surprised you, performed better, or is better than you thought it would be. Please do let us know in the comments below, and do subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to stay notified of all our new videos. This is Abbas signing out, and stay tuned to Tech Radar for everything in the world of tech.